Hello, and welcome to today's Training Industry Leader Talk, Developing Sellers Who Deliver Results, sponsored by Allego, Corporate Visions, Huthwaite International, the Brooks Group, and Lone Rock Leadership. I'm Amanda Longo, VP of Brand Strategy here at Training Industry, and I'm thrilled to have you here with us today. Before we get started, as always, we want to go over some tips and tricks to help you interact with our speaker and other attendees as we move through today's program. Of course, you'll notice the popular chat button at the bottom in your toolbar. Post chat comments at any time, and also use the Q&A pod to submit your questions. Of course, we'll answer questions and address chat throughout, so keep them coming. Once the session ends, a brief survey will appear in your browser. Please take a moment to share your feedback. You know how us learning leaders love those smile sheets. So let us know what you thought about today's program or any topics you want to see us cover here in the future. All Leader Talk sessions are recorded and archived on trainingindustry.com, and you will receive a follow-up email from us with a link to the on-demand sessions so you can share those with your team. If you've previously attended one of our events in the past, a very special welcome to you. If this is your first Training Industry event, I'm so glad you're here. At Training Industry, we are dedicated to making the right connections that advance the business of learning. As part of that mission, we provide resources to support your role in L&D, like today's virtual event, articles on our website, our magazine, conferences, research reports, podcasts, we do it all. But we would love to connect with you as well. Join us on your favorite social media platforms and let's continue the conversation. Now, without any further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce you to today's dynamic speaker. Doug Hutton, SVP of Sales at Corporate Visions, leads all post-sale teams for exceptional delivery of the company's science-backed messaging, content, and skills. Each year, his customer success and consulting delivery teams orchestrate the customer experience to help 250 plus B2B commercial organizations have more successful conversations with prospects and customers. We're so excited to welcome you here today, Doug. So let's jump into this leader talk.
Awesome. My pleasure. Thanks for that introduction, Amanda. And let me put my screen up, see if we're good to go, which I believe we are. There we go. Awesome. Good afternoon. Good morning, everybody out there. Two things before I even get started. One, if you've got a notebook handy while you're watching and a pen, take that out because you're going to want to write a few things down while you go. In fact, the science says that even if you just doodle while you listen, you'll actually remember more than if you did nothing at all. And secondly, as Amanda already pointed out, please feel free to use the chat along the way. I've got it up on my screen. Drop any questions you'd like. Happy to answer them in the moment. We'll also be doing some polling questions along the way to keep folks engaged. So the first thing I'd ask you to write down, if you've got that notebook or digital device of your choosing, are these three numbers that you see on the screen: 103, 12, and 88. And they tell a story about why your sales professionals, in conversation with customers in those high stakes moments, is so incredibly important. Now, it may not seem that way at first because 103 actually is the number of millions of hands of online poker that a group at MIT studied. 103 million hands. Now, online poker, there's a ton of data, right? Exactly how every hand played out, exactly the betting strategies that players used, et cetera, et cetera. Tons of data. Just like every conversational intelligence system can give you a ton of data on those buyer conversations in those high stakes moments. But here's what these MIT researchers found. In only 12% of those online poker hands did the actual best hand, statistically best hand of poker, win the pot. Now, the math majors out there in the digital world this morning will quickly tell you that then the 88% of hands were actually won by the best player. The player with the best strategy, the best bluff, the best betting approach along the way, not necessarily the best hand. Now align that to the commercial conversations that your sellers need to have in those high stakes buyer moments. Many of you are in competitive worlds where, in fact, if you think about the hand as your product, let's be honest, your competitors probably have a pretty good product. Some of them may actually have a better product on the merits than what you have. But in online poker, 88% of the time it was the best player that wins. And here at Corporate Visions, we certainly believe that it's the best seller who wins in those critical high stakes buyer moments. In fact, a little bit of recent research by Gartner, one more number to jot down, is actually 75. Because Gartner just put this stat out there. And it's interesting because it almost walks back some of what they've been talking about. Because we've been hearing for a long time now about how B2B buyers want less seller interaction. So many of them say, hey, if I could do it without a seller, I would. But in fact, most recently, that's not true. In fact, from Gartner, 75% of buyers are actually saying, you know what? I need and want that human engagement at those critical decision points in my purchase. Pair that up with what you just saw, the 88% of the best player winning the pot. What this stat tells you is that right now, sellers are the make or break moment in whether buyers choose to do business with you or the competition. Buyers want to engage with sellers more at those critical moments. And so your teams need to have the best sellers in those high stakes moments, which begs the question, what are those high stakes moments? And what are those ones where buyers are looking for even more out of your sales professionals than they were before? And so that's where I want to go first. In fact, we're going to cover three big things across the course of our time together today. The first is that very important question, why do you win or lose? Or put it another way, what are those high stakes moments that buyers say sellers must be best at? The second then becomes, hey, can your sellers do that? Are they actually good at those things that buyers in this buying environment expect from your sales team? And then the third, for all of you on the call today, maybe you're a learning professional in L&D, maybe you're a sales enablement professional, maybe you're a sales leader. How do you actually make them better on those things that buyers say drive wins and losses? So that leads me to get a little read of the room here before we dive into that first topic. And so, Amanda, if you wouldn't mind throwing up that first polling question here, because I think it'll give everybody a nice grounding. And so I'd love to know, what is the primary way that you determine in your organization why you won or lost a deal? What's the primary way? So only one response. Maybe you do a couple things on this list, but what is the primary way? And I'll give folks just a couple moments to answer that. Sadly, it says as a host, I can't vote, but I do have an answer. But we'll give folks just a few seconds there.
All right.
And Amanda, when you see things start to slow down, feel free to share the results with the group.
They're still ticking up and down. I'm going to give them another moment, but I'm going to count it down. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. The suspense. All right.
The suspense.
Here's the results.
Let's see what they look like. I love it. Well, this is great. I try to plan the polling question so it weaves into the story. This one's perfect. Look at this, folks, as you see those results. A majority are either relying on their sellers through a tick box or don't have any mechanism at all. I'm glad for those of you, the 15% of you that are doing a formal program. But here's why that matters. Here's why that matters, because remember the topic here. What do sellers need to do differently in high stakes buyer moments? If you're not understanding why you win or lose, you're not understanding what those high stakes moments are. And I want to make folks feel good about themselves here for a moment. What we see out there in the market, both with our clients and our prospects, is that in fact, a good majority of the world is still doing that ask the seller thing in CRM. They close a deal, they've got the drop down or the checkbox, why did you win or lose? And all of us as learning and sales professionals on this call know that for a win, that seller makes themselves the hero. Well, I won that deal because I was just amazing. And when you lose, it was about everything else. Product, price, I didn't get the support I needed, you name it. But the question that I ask then is, well, why aren't we asking the individual who signed the check and signed the SOW, the customer? They're the one who can actually give us that information of why we won or lost. Because even with all the technology that all of you have in your organizations, you are blind to what is going on behind the scenes in the customer's decision-making process when they're not in conversation with you. And in fact, Gartner will tell you that the answers you get when you ask your sellers versus asking the customer are different 70% of the time. So if you're trying to find out what those high stakes moments are and whether your sellers are any good at them or not, you have to go try to bridge that gap. And frankly, we bridge that gap here at Corporate Visions by asking the buyer and asking the customer. In fact, we sit on top of what we believe to be the largest B2B decision database of actual buyer decisions. 150,000 decisions where a buyer chose vendor A over vendors B, C, D, or E. And from that, we can do a lot of data analysis on why buyers choose one vendor over another and what buyers say are those most critical moments in their decision process. And here's one big stat that came out of that, and I jot this one down. 53% of buyers said that a losing vendor could have won the deal if not for a misstep in the sales experience that your teams deliver. Put another way, your sellers account for 53% of why you win or lose a deal. Now, yes, again, the math majors on the call will quickly point out that that means 47% are due to other factors, sure, product, price, you name it. But not to let our sales teams off the hook, sales teams and sellers individually in those critical moment buyer conversations are accounting for the majority of why you win or lose. So once we saw this stat, we then dug into the data even further to ask that next order question. Okay, what are buyers looking for in their buying experience? What should sellers deliver that match to what buyers expect? And so that's exactly what we did to try to find what are those predictive buyer experiences, where if your sellers deliver on them better than the competition, you will have higher win rates and it'll be more predictive of your future success. So I'm going to put all 8 of these up on the screen once. Grab a screen capture. Might be easier than taking notes on this one. And I know you'll get the recording as well for those listening later on. But what you see on the screen here are the top 8. We affectionately refer to them as the Great 8. The Great 8 predictive buyer experiences. Answering that very question, in those high stakes moments, what must your sellers deliver in those conversations with buyers? And just to explain the numbers quickly for the stats geeks out there, you're looking at area under the curve analysis. The closer to 1, the more predictive it is of wins. The closer to 0.5, the more coin toss it becomes. I'm just going to quickly say what you don't see on the screen. You don't see product knowledge. You don't see industry knowledge. And you don't see the ease of facilitating a purchase. It's not to say those aren't important, not to say that sellers shouldn't do those things, but they are not the most predictive of wins. And they do not separate a great buying experience from a mediocre buying experience. They are table stakes. But then take a look at what does matter to buyers. And I'll just highlight 3 of the 8. The first, you'll notice very clearly that the single most compelling and differentiated thing that your sales professionals can do in buyer conversation is to align solution to needs. Now, simple in theory, but because it is so predictive, it actually means that buyers see this even less from the average seller. Buyers see a misalignment between the needs that they have and the solution that a seller proposes. And we know that is because there is not alignment on the underlying problem that that buyer is trying to solve. The second, almost as predictive that I'd call out over here, demonstrate clear differentiation. Sellers, again, are typically not very good at communicating to a buyer what makes their solution and their offering different. Buyers right now are seeing a lot of same, and especially for those tech companies out there on the line right now and watching this recording. I was at an industry event last week. I walked around the trade show floor. There were tech vendors, there were professional services vendors, a lot of vendors, probably about 20 to 25. And I looked at the banner behind each booth. Every single banner said something about AI and agents. And I honestly couldn't tell a single one apart. Because buyers are looking for you to demonstrate clear differentiation. And the fact that it's so predictive, again, tells us that your sellers, by and large, can't do it well. The last one I want to call out seems so simple. Again, resolving concerns responsibly. This isn't hard, folks. This is literally buyers saying, can you please just get back to me on time? Can you please be responsive to the questions I ask? This is a 101 sales skill that is still highly predictive of wins and losses. And yet, because it is so predictive, it tells you that the average seller doesn't do it as well as he or she should. So again, we're trying to answer this question, what should sellers do differently in those high stakes moments? And I'd love for you to drop in the chat, of the 8 on this page, which one surprises you the most? Which one surprises you the most that it is so predictive of win rates along the way? Just drop it into chat when you have a moment. Which one do you feel is most predictive? Excuse me, which surprises you the most along the way? But I want to pull up, while you do that, for those of you who know us at Corporate Visions, you know that's about how all of this fits into that buyer's journey in your sales process. And so we know that a lot of your teams, and I imagine many of you, are involved in the sales process work, all the internal workings of how a seller advances a deal. But all that stuff in purple is just internal stuff. You have to create an experience that buyers say matters in those high stakes moments. And as you can see, those moments can align early in your company's sales process. That's all about doing great discovery, aligning solution to needs, making that case for change. While later on in your sales process, that's all about how are you helping a buyer justify a decision, and how are you being a good creative negotiation partner along the way. And as Barbara just dropped in the chat, thanks, Barbara. Being a creative negotiation partner and negotiating creatively there may be a little bit surprising. Again, it feels like a fundamental sales skill. But again, that tells us that the average seller isn't doing it well enough that a buyer perceives a difference as they go. Now, for those of you who know us here at Corporate Visions, you know for a long time, we've espoused, because of the research out there, that acquiring a new customer is actually a different sales motion than retaining and expanding an existing customer. And so as a result, the great 8 that you've seen so far is all about acquiring net new business. They are the top 8 most predictive competencies if your sales teams are trying to go get a net new logo who doesn't work with you today. They are a different set of predictive experiences than on the retention and expansion side. That makes sense, right? Buyers are expecting different things. There are many different motions when you're working with an existing client than when you're working with a prospect. Now, you will notice the eagle-eyed folks on the chart very quickly will find that there are 2 that are common on both sides. I'll highlight those here with a green circle. Deliver compelling communications. Buyers, regardless of prospect or client, they need that. And even though it's worded slightly differently here, resolving concern, resolving issues, all prospects and customers believe they need that as well. The others, though, are different, which means for the learning and enablement professionals on the call today, that does mean in the programming that you need to deploy, and we'll talk about this here in a few minutes, does need to differ. If you're supporting a team that is focused on new business generation, new logo generation on the acquisition side, versus retention and expansion on the right-hand side. Because again, anchored in the buyer in those high stakes moments, different things matter, whether it's a prospect or a client. And I do want to do just one quick click on the right-hand side of this, because here at Corporate Visions, everything we do, data-based, data-driven, research-backed. And so we can say with precise clarity that the great 8 for acquisition have those very specific predictive values. I'll put again all 8 up, another great slide to grab a screen capture. We are still working through the precise statistical values for the ones on the retention and expansion side of the house. So far, looks good, but in transparency, not all the way there yet where we can say with as much certainty that these are the ones relative to others. But again, let me just call out a couple for those of you that are supporting post-sale teams in addition to pre-sales teams. The first, again, I'd call out top left-hand side. Buyers expect that they are going to drive successful outcomes from what they buy from you. Are your teams defining what those metrics should be with the customer? And is your customer starting to track them? And then later on, right below it, you'll notice that clients expect you then to be able to reinforce the value of the partnership against the very metrics that you selected early on. Now, best case, you've defined those in the sales process itself, moving all the way forward into post-sale. But I know not every team does. The third that I would call out, of course, again, just to see how simple it is. Are your teams resolving client issues effectively and responsively? Again, it seems like table stakes, but the fact that it's on the list should tell you that most sellers don't do it as effectively as buyers need them to do it. And so again, just like on the pre-sale side, similarly on the post-sale side, there's probably an account development process that you have, maybe an account planning process that you have, that it runs across every existing client engagement. But then it's about how do you overlay those client experiences? Because again, who are you going back to? I don't want to ask the seller or the account team necessarily why they won or lost. I want the customer to tell me, because they are the ones that sign the checks. And with an existing client, they are looking for a set of unique things from your sales teams in those critical client moments. So ultimately, this is all about, and I'll leave this one up again, a third screen capture slide here in this section. But ultimately, this is about answering the question, what are those critical buyer moments? So to the title of this talk, you need to know what those high stakes moments are, not based on what you think they are, but what the data says buyers know that they are, because in those moments, they are most predictive of wins and losses. And again, I'd offer to you to drop in a chat as you see this list on the screen in front of you. Which of these do you believe your sales team or post-sales team needs the most work on? What do you believe is the competency or experience that you see on this slide that you believe your sales team needs the most work on right now? Give folks just a moment to glance at the screen, drop something in the chat. Again, just learning a little bit from your peers as to where you see your teams needing the most support against what buyers say drives wins. Thanks, Steve, for making a case for change. Courtney, love that you're supporting the post-sale teams on demonstrating future value, that there's more to be had from that partnership. Barbara, thanks. Defining metrics, identifying new ops. Yeah, certainly among our client base, we all know existing customers are the gold mine of future revenue growth. And if you're identifying new opportunities, the better. Differentiation. Again, yeah, it's one of the ones we're seeing right now, especially in competitive industries. Differentiation is so hard to come by. Everybody's talking about the same thing. How do you get that unique viewpoint along the way? I appreciate the interaction. Thanks, everybody. So that's the first question. How do you define what the high stakes moments are? And you need to get that from buyers because they're the ultimate arbiter. Then the second question becomes, okay, so now that we know what the moments are, do you know if your sellers are any good at doing it? And with that, Amanda, if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to throw up our second polling question before we go into this section here. And so I'd love to, again, get the group's perspective. What data do you use to prioritize your enablement and training programs? Put another way, how do you tell what your teams are good at along the way? We'd love your thoughts here. We'll give it a couple seconds for the responses to roll in. Again, multiple choice on this one. You're allowed to select more than one response because I know it is possible that you may be using more than one of these for that prioritization along the way.
All right, I'm super excited to see what the callers have to say on this one. What data are you using? I'm so curious. And this is a choose all that applies, so we'll give you another moment here. And
I forgot to include on this one, Amanda, the what data? What are you talking about? Answer choice. But we'll hope that everybody has at least one piece of data that they are using.
All right, here we go. Wrapping it up.
There we go. Let's see what we got. There you go. So a nice cross section. Across there of some seller performance data, some assessment work, some corporate priorities. And again, I don't think any of these in and of their own right are good or bad. It's just sort of to see like where are folks getting the data. And so I appreciate that. And it's very mixed. And I say that is what we are seeing across our clients as well. And so in this section, I want to offer a unique data point to determine how good your teams are or not against what buyers need them to be good at. Because again, we want to anchor everything on the buyer, what experience they are expecting out of your sales teams along the way. And to answer that question, can your teams actually do what buyers expect of them to drive wins for you? And so ultimately, that leads to what we call a precision skills intelligence assessment. Can your teams do the things that buyers expect of them in those high stakes moments? And so in an assessment like this, leveraging, I think I'm legally obligated to mention AI across any presentation I do. So here we are. I'm mentioning AI. I've checked the box. But think of this as a new to world AI simulation assessment, where your teams could walk through 3 elements of a typical sales process in a simulated format: some initial outreach, a presentation of the solution, and ultimately a conversation with executives around business justification. And through that assessment, trying to isolate, can your teams do the very experiences that buyers are expecting of them that drive more wins? So versus a self-assessment or a manager assessment, which, as we all know in here, have their merits, but has a lot of bias in it. In this scenario, with a precision skills assessment, actually trying to determine, can they do it? Can they perform it in such a way that it gives you as a learning leader or an enablement leader the confidence that you're focused on the right things in the programming that you roll out. And so one of the cool things about an assessment like this is indeed the amount of data it throws off that can help you then design the right training and enablement programming to align with what buyers expect and the biggest gaps in your organization. And so I just want to give, across the next few slides, you're going to see some anonymized data from a real client who actually went through this assessment process. And I want to give you some just ideas, thought starters, as to where you could leverage data like this as you plan out your training and enablement programs, both with this data and in context of other data that you might have. So the first is at the top level, you'd get a little bit of a competency gap look across each individual competency. And just take a look at the red, yellow, green on this chart for a moment. I know it's an eye chart. There's names on there that are anonymized, but I want to draw your attention to 2 different competencies here. If you look at this organization and demonstrate clear differentiation, you'll notice there's not that many folks that are terrible at it. Also, not many folks that are exceptional at it either. Compare that, though, to Align Solution to Needs here on the left-hand side, where there's more almost equal across the board. And so at the organizational level, this is nice to know, but again, as a training and enablement professional, it doesn't give you exactly the precision yet to roll out programming at the cohort or even the personalized level. So let's dig down into that. This is your overarching view. Now, an assessment like this is, of course, immediately helpful to the individual, because the individual can see precisely where I need to focus my time. And so you see here, Jennifer Cook, very clearly, gap for her is aligning solutions to needs and resolving concerns responsively. But that's different than Stephen. Stephen, making a case for change there, that's his lower scoring area. Now you can see very clearly, not every seller in your organization is going to have similar gaps. We all know that, which is why I think we're seeing less and less peanut butter approach to training, or to use the UK analogy, a sheep dip approach to training. Because as an assessment like this clearly shows, some sellers are good at some things and other sellers are good at other things. And so to try to roll out a one-size-fits-all training program and training curricula is actually a disservice to the broader organization. But that's at the individual level. Now, put yourselves in the shoes for a moment of a team leader. Imagine getting this look for your team. Allison's the leader of the team, and she went through the assessment as well. And she's got a team made up of 6 individual sellers that, as you can see, have broader performance gaps. But interestingly, this data actually, I think, puts to rest one of the mistakes that learning and development has long made, especially in sales, which was, hey, we're going to ask Allison to be the coach and to be the developer of talent on Allison's team across every sales skill. Now, as you look at this right now, it certainly looks like Allison's team has a gap in aligning solution to needs. Half of the team is in the red. Well, guess what, folks? I don't expect Allison's team to get better at that competency. Here's why. Allison isn't very good at it. And yet, so many learning and enablement programs rely on the manager to be an expert at something that they may not be good at. Now, I'm going to give you an answer to that here in a moment. Now, on the other side, also, there's some red for Allison's team here around articulating meaningful value. I fully expect Allison to be a great resource there along the way. Sarah, to the question that you just popped into the Q&A panel, how are the competency results determined? That's through that precision skills assessment. It's about a 30-minute assessment designed, think of it, a little bit of role play, a little bit of listening and reacting, a little bit of multiple choice along the way, all about how does that individual actually perform in those key buyer moments along the way. So I want to put to bed just that notion of sellers are going to have gaps, managers are too. And that's why having clear cohorts where even the manager could participate is critical. And this is where peer coaching comes into play as well. An assessment like this can show you, hey, there are going to be some folks, and we're into that aligned solution to needs competency. There's a good number of folks that are really good at that approach, and some that are really not. How can you get a peer coaching program or a manager coaching program? In this instance, think back to Allison's team on the prior slide. Allison and her team could probably benefit from some of the great individuals that are scoring high on that competency. But a good number of you in that polling question a moment ago said that, hey, you're using multiple data sources to drive your training and enablement programs. And that's exactly what the client behind this data actually did. Client behind this data ran the assessment results. They got all of their competency scoring. And here's what they did. They looked first at the top 25% of scores on each competency. They then looked at the lowest 25% of scores. And then they triangulated that data with their win rates. Basically, the question they were trying to answer was exactly that. How should they prioritize their training and enablement efforts to maximize their win rate improvement? Because it's one thing to know a gap. It's another thing to know what actually drives performance. And as you can see very clearly, I don't even need to circle these on the screen. There were three very clearly where raising the performance of that bottom quartile makes an outsized difference to win rates. Now, interestingly, and you just saw the data down here at the bottom, there were some big gaps in that aligned solution to needs competency at this client. But when you compared those gaps to win rate, if their training and enablement team focused there, it wouldn't actually drive the largest win rate improvement. So they chose to focus on three competencies that would drive the most win rate improvement if that bottom quartile were to improve. Help justify decisions, deliver compelling communications, and articulating meaningful value. And off the back of that analysis, they then looked at the bottom scores in each of those areas and created a training and enablement program for those groups specifically. I think the key word here is cohort. We are seeing a lot more cohort-based learning along the way, because data like this gives you the ability to see, can sellers actually do the things that buyers need them to do in those high-stakes moments? And will your programming actually drive win rate improvements across your team? So just want to give you a flavor of that. So then it becomes, I think, the punchline here across the last 10 minutes or so. You've seen now what buyers say are those high stakes moments and what drives them to choose a vendor over another. You've seen via a new to world assessment that you can determine whether or not sellers can actually do those things that drive buyers to make a decision in your favor. And lastly, especially for all of you on the call in learning and enablement, then it's about, okay, how do you actually roll out the programming to maximize the improvement that you have? And so before I go into this, again, last polling question, Amanda, if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to hear how your organizations are actually deploying training these days. This is a single choice. You may be doing more than one, but would love to hear how you all are deploying training as your primary modality. And while you're answering that, I'll answer David's question that came in. Define high stakes moment. We would define high stakes moment as the moments that buyers say are most predictive of whether they choose you or someone else. Those buying experiences that the data says if you operate better in this moment, the buyer is more likely to choose you along the way. And as you see here, I'm glad to see actually that the winning response is a blended approach, because as you'll see here in just a moment, we believe that is in fact the best way to deploy these cohort-based specific learning journeys along the way. Interesting though that instructor-led in-person is actually the lowest scoring right now. So how do you make it better? You've seen again the answer to the question of what those high stakes moments are, buyer defined. You've seen the competencies here on the screen. And so the first answer then is, okay, where do you go down? Let me just let this slide populate here. Because you've seen all of the words on this page before, but again, I want to throw up two slides that, again, screen capture slides for you. The first is in learning and development, as you all know, it's you have to get down to the individual skill level. What is the very specific thing you want your target audience to learn, adopt, practice, and apply? And so just because many of your comments in chat have been talking about demonstrate clear differentiation, again, that's a high stakes moment, is when you're articulating that to the buyer. Well, what skills do you need in that moment? Well, your sellers need to be able to determine how they can define your unique value. Sellers then need to be able to tell a differentiated story in front of a buyer. And they need to amplify that differentiation through the language they use. It's a concept we call telling details along the way. So you got to get down to the skill level. And what you see on the screen here are the individual skills behind those predictive buying experiences. Now you see it here for acquisition. I want to put also, again, retention and expansion, different client experiences that you need your teams to create, which means different skills along the way that they need. So again, we talked a little bit earlier about defining success metrics. What does that actually mean that your teams need to do and need to get better at? They need to agree on metrics at multiple levels of the customer organization, exec level, project level. Think their Kirkpatrick model. I know that's key for this organization. But also their ability to run a partnership planning meeting where they're planning out what those metrics are. So then again, that question becomes for you, how are you deploying this in a way that's going to stick and that's going to actually build demonstrated proficiency in your teams? And I'll put all four of these up. It's a matter of doing all four of these motions that you see on the screen. One, of course, if somebody isn't good at a skill, they need to learn how to do that skill. Whether you deploy that instructor-led, whether you deploy that digitally, they need to actually learn what it is you're asking them to do. And again, all the way back to the beginning, what buyers want to see. They then need to apply it. Live deals, active opportunities, not just learning in a vacuum, but applying it to real deals, real opportunities, so that the gap between learning and application is not weeks or months, but hours or days. And of course, they need to practice. We are big fans here at Corporate Visions of all the AI role play tools that are out there right now. In fact, I would say almost all of our clients have one of the role play tools that are out there. If it's not something you're actively engaged in, would highly recommend it for two reasons. One, it takes the burden off your managers to do human role play. And two, it can scale. Your teams can practice as many times as they want to learn what that competency can do for them and improve each time they go. And then last but not least, coaching. Can your teams actually coach to it? Like that example you saw earlier. Are you equipping that fictional Allison to be able to coach to these skills for always on skill improvement along the way? You have to be able to showcase that learning, that application, that practicing, that coaching along the way in each of those areas. Now, that's why I asked that question, how are you deploying this? Because the optimal right now is indeed a blend of every approach, taking a cohort through some digital content to start, taking them through perhaps some live experiences. Maybe that's live virtual, small group, you name it. Again, back to digital for that practice. Think too here, for those of you with a conversation intelligence platform. How can you then take that practice and move it into recorded calls so that you can coach there as well? And then how do you scale your managers? How do you scale that ability to ensure that every single one of your sellers is at the right level of proficiency and maintains that right level of proficiency along the way? And so I want to land exactly where I started. The best players, those poker players where 88% of them are winning the hand, even when they don't have the best statistical hand. You know that many of your sales teams are in opportunities and deals where they may not have the best product, the best service on every dimension. They have to be the best players, especially in those high stakes moments. So you know now, why do you win or lose? Why do buyers say you win or lose? Those high stakes moments have to be buyer defined. And thanks to our win-loss database, you know exactly which buyer moments sellers must be great at. Then you have to answer, do you know what your sellers are good at in your organization? Again, not just good at everything, but good at those buyer-defined predictive moments where buyers are expecting them to show up differently. And then lastly, how do you make them better? Are you rolling out blended learning journeys tailored to cohorts and, if possible, individuals that help them improve on their biggest gaps? Again, aligned to those buyer-defined high-stakes moments. Of course, we'd certainly love the opportunity to help along the way as you take that journey. And so please feel free to grab the link, the QR code that you see on your page here to get even more of a sense for how do you do this just-in-time enablement? How do you ensure that those cohort-based individualized learning journeys come to life in your organization, as I'm sure many of you are already attempting or rolling out. But it's been my pleasure to bring a little bit of corporate visions to all of you here this afternoon. We've got just a couple minutes left. Feel free to drop any questions into the Q&A or the chat, either one, whichever your choice, and I'd be happy to take any that you've got here in the last couple minutes. Robin, thank you. I appreciate that you thought it was great. Any other questions from folks that I can answer for you here in the last minute or so?
While we're waiting on some possible more questions, Doug, wow, I had no idea. This has been a really great presentation, and I have been doing webinars for training industry for 14 years. So it is tough to keep my attention and on a subject that is not necessarily my forte, sales, but I'm like, I could go into sales. I could do this.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Steve, to your question, the competency survey, it is not based on industry. So when we looked across all of our win-loss data, we very specifically were looking at what is true across the board. Now, I'm sure there are probably minor industry-specific variations and perhaps which competency would pop a little bit more based on buyers in that industry. But we were explicitly looking for what holds true across B2B. What's going to be true regardless of where you are, for exactly that reason. Whether you're selling heavy manufacturing, whether you're selling technology, whether you're selling human capital consulting, wanting to find out what do buyers always expect that are going to be most predictive of winning and losing.
All right. Well, I think we're going to
Thank you, Amanda. Very much appreciate the opportunity today. Very much so.
It's been great having you. What a great presentation. I see a lot of kudos in the chat, some thumbs up there, high fives, and Doug, you deserve them all. So really great way to have our second hour of 5, keeping people revved up and enthused about the topic. So again, thank you for being here. Of course, we are going to take a short break, 15 minutes, so you can have a little snack, bathroom break, take the dog out, whatever you need to do, and then we will be back to welcome Jared Jones for their session sponsored by Lone Rock Leadership, The Secret to Creating Accountable Results driven sellers. One last time, though, thank you so much to Corporate Visions for bringing Doug onto today's program. We hope that you'll stick around for Jared's session, which begins at the top of the hour. Thanks, everybody.